From San Antonio, Texas, home of the Alamo, the Riverwalk, and the World Heritage San Antonio Missions, this is the Exit Planning Coach podcast with John F. Dini. Designed to help advisors who work with business owners, John talks with top professionals in the exit planning field about best practices, marketing tips, and how to be more effective when working with owners. Now, here's John F. Dini.
Welcome to the Exit Planning Coach podcast. Glad to have everyone back. My guest today is Kelly Finnell, and I've known Kelly for about 12 years. And Kelly is one of the premier ESOP consultants in the country. Kelly spent more than 40 years helping business owners, or has spent. I can't talk totally in the past tense because you're still doing it. 40 years in helping owners design and execute ESOPs. He's a sought-after speaker. As a matter of fact, he spoke to the San Antonio Estate Planning Council a couple of years ago. They brought him in, had nothing to do with me. And he's an accomplished writer. He wrote the ESOP Coach, which is a book that is on my shelf and should be, I think, on every exit planning advisor's shelf. It's a great, straightforward, this is an ESOP, this is how you do it. He's published dozens of articles and is a big player in the National Center for Employee Ownership and is very well known there. Welcome, Kelly. It's a privilege to have you on.
Well, thanks, John. It's great to be with you.
This is really neat. We're going to talk today about ESOPs, but first I'd like to talk a little bit about you. I know you've got a JD and you've got a couple other letters after your name. What else do you have after your name?
CLU and AIF.
Okay, so you were in the insurance field to start out?
I worked for the legal department of an insurance company when I was in law school.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yes. Yeah.
And how did you go from the legal department of an insurance company to ESOPs?
Well, it's a story that I've never shared with you in the 12 years that we've known each other. This was the summer of 1979.
Okay.
And Arissa was 5 years old at that point.
Right.
And most of the retirement plan work that was being done way back then was defined benefit plans.
Mm-hmm.
And so our legal department worked closely with the actuarial department at this insurance company. One morning, we were having a all hands meeting, and the head of the department had received an actual letter. Back then, there were no emails, there weren't even any personal computers. And so the United States Postal Service delivered a letter from New Orleans, Louisiana. The gentleman opened the letter, and it was a request for that department to write a white paper on ESOPs. And so I had just finished my first year of law school, and during law school, you do these things in the summer called internships. So this was my first internship. And these experienced pension lawyers all looked around at each other and said, I don't know anything about ESOP. Some of them had never even heard of an ESOP. They said, let's give that project to the kid. And back then in 1979, I was the kid. So I spent about a month researching and writing that white paper. So I go back to law school, finish up, take the bar exam, finish that, open up my business, Executive Financial Services, in October of 81, and started doing ESOPs then. So,
wow.
So I'm doing this for over 40 years now.
So you are an original.
Yes.
Did you have you, how many people have you run across that were involved in doing ESOPs before you?
Well, I knew a lot of people, but most of them are dead now.
Oh.
So I had a great mentor. I think he graduated from law school. I graduated from law school in 81. He graduated from law school in 61. I graduated from law school at the University of Memphis. He graduated from law school at this little place in Boston called Harvard.
I heard of that.
He was my ESOP mentor. And so he had been doing it since the very beginning, since 1974, when Arissa came into the laws. But there aren't many of us that go back that deep in experience.
Yeah. It's funny you talk about Arissa in 74. and there was and Tefra was about the same era. And, looking back, I don't think anybody thinks of Richard Nixon as a great social reformer, but he put a lot of stuff in place that was social reform.
Well, and people a lot of times don't think about retirement plan law and ERISA being about social reform, but you're experienced enough to know that it is.
Oh,
A
sure.
lot of what they've done has been about achieving laudable social goals. And certainly ESOPs are 100% on that track.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny. And I don't even know if I don't know if you even know this. ERISA and Tefra were the building blocks when I was in healthcare. They were the building blocks for HMOs.
I did not know that.
They enabled HMOs. As you know, this is a podcast for advisors. Many people do podcasts for business owners. And if we were doing it for business owners, we would do ESOP 101. What is an ESOP and how do I do it? But I'm moving forward on the assumption that most of the people that regularly subscribe to this podcast have a pretty good idea what an ESOP is. They've at least seen a couple of them.
Yep.
So what I'd like to do is get a little deeper into the kind of nuts and bolts of the ESOP. One of the first things we hear all the time is ESOPs are expensive, and only big companies can do it. To address that for me, is it true? How big is big? How small a company can do it? What's a good candidate look like?
Well, first, I don't want to dodge the hard questions. I'm not a politician, so I'm going to hit that head on. ESOPs are expensive. It would cost a company approximately $500,000 to do an ESOP and do it right and pay all the parties that are involved. And one of the reasons ESOPs are so expensive is that you have half a dozen lawyers involved in each transaction. But by comparison to other exit strategies, ESOPs are not expensive. You don't have an investment banker involved with, 7-figure fees. You still have the lawyers and the accountants, and you have a new party involved, the ESOP trustee. And so in absolute terms, ESOPs are expensive, but relative to the cost of other exit strategies, not as expensive. And so then your question was, what's a good candidate? So let's start with size. We've done 25 transactions over the last 3 years. The smallest company that we worked with had adjusted EBITDA of $1.2 million. We generally recommend that ESOPs are appropriate for companies that have at least 2 million of adjusted EBITDA.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one thing about rules. There are always exceptions. And so this company implemented an ESOP with about half our recommended level. The largest company that we've dealt with during this period of time had 56 million of EBITDA. So if you throw out those two outliers, our median transaction was for companies that have 4 million of EBITDA. So I would say that that is a pretty good number in terms of defining what the world of ESOP companies looks like. About $4 million of EBITDA would probably be a good median, with the range generally being between 2 million of EBITDA up to 100 million.
Okay.
In terms of the size of employees, the smallest one that we did had about 42 employees. The largest one over 400. The median there was about 96, so just under 100 employees.
Okay.
That's typically what you would see, a company with 4 million of EBITDA and about 100 employees.
Oh, I just, have to remember that some people watch this on YouTube. So they probably saw me grab my calculator when you said $500,000. But that's 4% of a $12 million deal.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
that would be the investment banking fee only. That would not be the attorneys and all the other consultants that
Right.
you would have in such transaction.
Yeah. And, I love the old expression, a cynic is someone who knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next question is, what do you get for that $500,000?
Okay.
You probably, in a $4 million company, are going to generate about $20 million of tax benefits over a 10-year period.
Mm.
So if I ask someone to pay me $500,000 to get $10 million or $20 million in tax benefits over the next 10 years, that would probably be a pretty easy
Let me think
for them to say yes.
Yeah, let me think about that one, Kelly. Hold on. Yes. Okay, I'll do that. Yeah.
You took longer than most people.
Before we go to a break, when you talk, we all talk about the boomers in this industry. We all know, the 51% of businesses are still owned by people 58 years or older. But when you speak, you talk about crisis fatigue, and I think it's similar to what I've brought up in several of my books about this. But what are you seeing right now? Is there an upswing? Are there more people that are interested? Are you doing more business?
Yeah, we considered a good year. Our goal for a number of years had been to do 6 transactions per year, and over the last 3 years, we've averaged 8. And so that's a pretty nice uptick in activity.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're suggesting, John, I think that is driven primarily by baby boomers, and especially baby boomers who have crisis fatigue. So I was born in 55, so I'm kind of right in the middle of the baby boom. And the Great Recession hit when I was 53 years old. So that was 2008. Then COVID hit when I was 65 years old. And now we've got the, banking crisis that we all became aware of earlier this year. And I'm 68 now. And so I think
and inflation and a war and all that other little stuff that's going on.
A looming recession.
Yeah.
And so I think that business owners are looking to de-risk because of the aging of the baby boomers. They're getting to the point where they know they need to be more conservative. They need to de-risk. And because of these crises, they know that risk is real.
Well, and you didn't on the crisis side, you forgot to mention this little pandemic thingo that occurred, but also as not as a counterpoint, but as a supplement to what you just said. What I see as well is that the businesses that survived the financial crisis in 08 and 09 and came out lean and mean, those owners had a pretty good 12 years.
Yes.
Before the pandemic came along. The economy was booming and they did very, very well. And I hear a lot of it's crisis fatigue, just as you said, but it's also, I didn't think I'd wind up where I am today financially, and it's pretty good. And I don't need to push a lot harder for a lot longer.
Well, I think that's a great point. So you combine crisis fatigue with a feeling that maybe we're at the top of the market in terms of the value of my company. So that's a great point, John. You're exactly right.
Yeah. Let me take 60 seconds here so we can pay for the podcast, and then we'll come back and continue talking about what kind of companies make good ESOP candidates. Hello, John F. Dini here, and I'm very excited to announce the publication of the Exit Planning Coach Handbook. Inspiration for the handbook comes from my 25 years of working as a coach to business owners, with 12 of those years dedicated to helping them plan their business transitions. It is a guide for advisors that explains why working with business owners is so dramatically different from working with other executives. It provides insights on how to approach planning conversations with owners more effectively. Plus, it takes you through the steps that will help you develop your relationship as their most trusted advisor. I wrote this book for advisors who want their clients to move on to a second act that's even more rewarding than their first. If you read any of my previous books, you know I don't lecture. It's a conversation between two professionals. If you work with business owners, I strongly encourage you to read the Exit Planning Coach Handbook. I think it will quickly become a go-to in your reference library. It is currently available on Amazon and the Kindle store in paperback and as an audiobook. Hi, welcome back. I'm here with Kelly Finnell. And Kelly, I'm going to ask you for contact information before we go any further. Obviously, it'll be with the podcast wherever it's posted, but if people are listening in their car or something and have their cell phone in hand because they need to talk to you immediately, how would they get a hold of you?
The phone is 901-259-7979. Email is kfin@execfin.com. And the website is execfin, EXECFIN.com.
Now, Finnell is spelled with two N's. Is K-Fin with one N or two N's?
Oh, wow. What a great question. One N. So we
Okay.
did ExecFin with one N, and so then had to do KFin with one N.
Okay, just want
That's
to
a
make
great
sure.
question.
What kind of owner is a good candidate for doing an ESOP?
Yeah. Well, first, I think I've got this scale that I refer to as the greed scale. And on one end, we've got Mother Teresa.
Okay.
And on the other end, we've got that character from the movie Wall Street who proclaimed that greed is good.
Gordon Gekko.
Gordon. And so in order to be a good candidate for an ESOP, a business owner does not have to be Mother Teresa looking to give his or her business away, but they usually don't have the mindset of Gordon Gekko and looking to squeeze the last penny out of the deal, regardless of what it means for other people, especially their employees and their customers. And so most of our clients want to cash in and maximize the value of their life's work, but they want to do it in such a way that they don't hurt the people who have helped them achieve this level of success, namely their employees and their customers. A lot of times they are people who tell me the success of our company is built on our culture. And I know if we sell to a third party, that culture is bound to change.
Mm-hmm.
And so we find a lot of professional services businesses, engineering firms, architectural firms, advertising and PR firms, businesses like that, where the employees and the culture are the key to their success. Those people oftentimes are attracted to ESOPs. Now, we do ESOPs for distribution companies and for manufacturing companies, but an almost automatic good candidate for an ESOP is someone who's running and owns a professional services business.
Although, the first one that you and I worked on together was a construction company.
Right.
But I have to point out, and we're both still very close to the owner of that it was an unusual construction company in that down to the laborer and South Texas laboring outside in the summer is not amusing. And not only was he a phenomenal caretaker of his employees. I mean, if you've ever seen one of his trucks on the road in the summer, he not only has the big orange things of water, but he has electrolytes and salt packets and salt tablets and sugar water and flavorings, all kinds of things out there to encourage hydration. He also had a health plan, and we're talking about South Texas. We're talking about most of the people that you have on the entry level have English as a second language, and paid health care, 401k with very generous matching before he ever decided to go for an ESOP. So, that he's always been my kind of standard for the kind of care for employees you should have to be a real
Yes.
good candidate for this.
Yes. On that scale of Mother Teresa and Gordon Gekko, he's more towards the Mother Teresa
Oh yeah.
in
Oh
terms
yeah.
of caring about people. And in addition to that, he's one of the smartest people I've ever met.
Yes, he's a really bright guy, and
Yeah.
and he's done very well with his both the company's tax advantage status and his own personal tax advantage status.
Yes.
But
that happened to a nicer guy.
yeah, no, he's great. So circling back, you mentioned that right at the outset, very tax advantaged. And you notice how cleverly I segued back into that.
Right.
What are the tax advantages?
Well, the first is for the business owner. If an owner is selling C corporation stock to an ESOP, he or she can reinvest their proceeds under Section 1042 of the code, which is a like-kind exchange provision, and not pay tax on the gain from that sale. Now, they have a transferred basis, just like they would in any other like-kind exchange. But most of our clients are people who are 65 and older, and so they buy a portfolio with the idea that it's going to generate current income for their retirement, and they're going to hold on to it till death when they get a stepped-up basis, and that deferral becomes a forgiveness. So that's the first tax benefit, and that's for the business owner. The second tax benefit is really focused on the company, and that is the ability to take your for-profit taxable company and turn it into a for-profit untaxed company. And so that sounds too good to be true. I acknowledge that. But it's really the combination of a couple of simple factors that all of your listeners already know about. The first is that S Corps don't pay tax, they're flow-through entities, and they flow their income through to their owner. And so currently, an individual owns that stock, and so the profits that are being generated are taxed at approximately 40%, depending upon where you are. Being in Tennessee and in Texas, maybe a little less than that. Being in California or New York, a lot more than that. What would happen if you flowed the income through to an entity that was tax exempt? ESOP trustees are the owner of the ESOP's shares, and under the law, like any other retirement plan trustee, ESOP trustees are tax exempt entities. I ask people to think about their 401k plan. At the end of the year, they get a 1099 on the earnings of all of their investments, except for their 401k plan. Nobody ever asked themselves the question, why didn't I get tax reporting on my 401k? But if they ask the question, the answer is because they don't own those assets. Those assets are owned for their benefit by the 401k trustee. And the same is true with the ESOP. The employees don't own the stock, it's owned for their benefit by the tax-exempt ESOP trustee. And so that's how you end up with Public Supermarkets, which is the largest ESOP-owned company in the country, 300,000 employees. And Publix competes very well with Kroger because Kroger pays tax and Publix doesn't.
And in an industry where you're looking at 2.5% bottom line margins, that's a big deal.
It's a huge difference.
Yeah. Okay, Kelly, we'd already talked about this. We can't possibly get through in one session. So we're going to wrap up this one, and I'm not going to pretend you're coming back. We're just going to continue and go into the second session. But we'll stop here. And in 2 weeks, which is our publication schedule, we'll be back on with the second half of this.